Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish and Broadcasting Scotland. I'm joined today by Chris Stevens MP and Ellen Hoefer, and we're going to discuss the week's news. We're just going to give time Chris to get his breath back because he's run all the way from the station, a wee soul, but he'll manage, no bother. So welcome to you both.
Hi. Welcome. Okay.
So of course first on the topic this week, guys, is Brexit. I'm sure everybody's absolutely fed up to the back teeth, but the problem is it's such an important issue that we need to talk about it. So this week, Theresa May said that she might not bring the vote back if there's insufficient support for it to pass. And if it doesn't pass, then the EU have set the deadline of the 12th of April for the UK, unless they come up with like a new plan. Will there be a vote, Chris?
Well, I think you're probably better putting on 6 numbers this week and you'll get better odds as to trying to guess where we'll be by the end of the week. All I can tell you is I know we're in a 3-line whip Monday to Thursday, possibly and been told we're on standby Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Next weekend I'm not sure you'll have an MP guest next week because we might still be down the road. So, but I think there's a number of things which concern me. I think Theresa May's statement on Wednesday, placing the blame on MPs was rather disgusting. And you'll know, Corri, because you were like me, elected in 2015. We lost a parliamentary colleague, Joe Cox, who was killed. That to try and put the blame on the members of Parliament and to try and make them the public enemy, I think was very dangerous. And I think that there will be a lot of comment about that when we return tomorrow. Whether there will be a vote or not, I think they'll probably try and have another go, but I think that what we also now have is the real possibility that Theresa May might not be Prime Minister by this time next weekend. It certainly looks as if the coups have begun, with one side wanting to put in David Lidington and the other side wanting to put in Michael Gove. So it's quite clear that there is now a very real crisis within the Conservative Party. And this was always going to be the case. This issue has been eating away at the Tory party for 20 years and have never resolved it. And we go back to the fundamental principle of no one explaining what leave would look like. There wasn't a booklet to say this is what the UK leaving the EU would look like. And I think that is primarily why they've got into all the difficulties they have and why we had fake red lines and why we had all these other issues which have been totally and utterly unresolved. And I think the lesson for us going forward for another referendum is we rightly had a booklet, 600-page book, which gave an outline of what the vision was. Now obviously I would want to see changes to that booklet and I think we need to update it. But I think that demonstrates why the Scottish Government were correct to have a booklet and provide a vision for independence.
But I think the Speaker's probably put a bit of a spanner in our works, given that he said he'll not accept anything unless it's a material change.
Yes.
So do you think this is why she's kind of, again, backpedaling a bit?
They might argue that what they have agreed with the European Union is a material change. The government might argue that, and obviously there are deadlines. That also will place how amendments are constructed. There'll have to be some serious consideration to that as well, because I mean I think the Speaker gave quite a fair ruling, which was you can't keep coming back with the same thing time after time, the same parliamentary session, and expecting different results. As we've seen, the first result was the biggest defeat in parliamentary history, and the second time was the 4th biggest defeat in parliamentary history. So I mean, as I said at the start, you could put 6 numbers on, you'd get better odds of trying to work out what's going to happen by this time next week.
And Ellen, in terms of, we're nearly at 3 years in this process and we don't seem to have a plan. What could possibly be the plan within the next week?
It's impossible to say, isn't it? It's impossible to say both for the UK as a whole, also for Scotland, and I think if we're honest, the EU is just as astounded and puzzled by what is going on. Within a week, we can't get anything done, but we can mess a great deal of things up, even more than they already are, and that seems to be the trend that we've been encountering over the last 3 years, almost. I really don't know.
And I suppose what makes it even, to add to the mix already, is the fact that we're nearly coming to European elections again.
Yeah. Which seems to be the first time that the UK has seriously talked about European elections ever since I can remember, and I've been here for more than half my life. It's very interesting to see that suddenly this is a topic when it has never been a topic before. Obviously the EU is making allowances to potentially even allow for the UK to continue to participate and to participate in that election, and I'm sure that folks like Alan Smith would love to keep their jobs and continue to lobby for Scotland if they're able to in that forum. But all of the options that we're looking at the minute seem extremely unlikely. That is because they are extremely unlikely options. We find ourselves in an extremely unlikely situation.
And in terms of, for example, yourself and other EU nationals that are here at the moment, how is this whole thing, how is it feeling to you right now?
I know for a fact that at least 50% of EU nationals in my surroundings are currently either leaving or are making plans to leave. For us, obviously, Brexit hit much earlier than for everybody else because the discrimination that has been caused by the uncertainty specifically affects employment. Even I am seriously considering leaving within the next couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. Something that I never thought I'd do.
And it's not just the Brexit issue. I mean, I can tell you from our casework, we wrote to all EU nationals in Glasgow South West, but we now have this ludicrous situation where EU nationals are failing an habitual residency test when they shouldn't be failing that habitual residency test. We've already got casework of women who had left their partners, they've got children. They should be passing the habitual residency test, and we're now having a real issue here with the Department of Work and Pensions who are failing and saying to people, you don't meet the criteria, you will not get state support. Now, this is a ludicrous situation, but it adds up to this culture of fear that EU nationals have, and why EU nationals like Ellen and many others are now considering that they should leave. And to add to that, one of the areas in my constituency, Ardennes, which has a high number of EU nationals, what the local housing association is saying to me is that these EU nationals are now leaving the area and they're now going back to Poland or wherever. So, I think there's a real hostile environment that's getting created towards EU nationals, and it really, really disturbs me and really worries me.
Because I think you said earlier, Ellen, that you've been here nearly half
your life,
more than half your life. So actually for you,
it is not returning home. It's not returning to anything.
It's alien to you really going back.
It is, and in a situation where I arrived in the UK without a finished school education and managed to work my way up to the point where I have a training as graphic designer and a university degree, but I have never in my life had so much trouble finding a job here. You're absolutely right when you're speaking about the hostile environment grinding on people. It's the uncertainty, but also this contributes to the uncertainty of employers, of landlords. We've had people contact us and ask our organisation, so should we be re-extending letting contracts to our European nationals? It's a very, very real thing. These are existential issues. People cannot do without a job. They cannot do without some sort of social security if they aren't able to find a job. And personally, I haven't gone and sought that social security in fear of not being able to obtain my right to stay here. And then there's the whole thing about, uncertainty, meaning that employers will not take you on. It's an impossible situation. I think we've gone on about it for long enough. Now that people are paying attention, I think you'll find that most EU nationals that are in any way able to are on their way out. Not out of choice. We don't want to be on our way out.
And I think this is going to harm all sectors of the economy. Public sector, the care sector. There'll be all sorts of sectors of the economy that's going to be damaged as a result of EU nationals leaving.
And in terms of, obviously we saw the petition this week to revoke Article 50 and basically, cancel Brexit. Now, this morning it's sitting just short of 5 million signatures. But when you talk about the hostile environment, it's been reported that the person who came up with the petition has already received 3 death threats. And all she said was she wanted proof that it was no longer the will of the people. Do you think that that petition has had an impact, but also will it actually make any difference to Theresa May?
Well, it's had an impact. I mean, if nearly 5 million people have signed it, it's had an impact. I mean, I think the figure that I saw this morning in Glasgow South West, it was just shy of 5,000. So who had signed that petition? It's quite clear other constituencies that were heavily Remain are hitting 24,000. So I think it shows the depth of feeling. I think it shows the depth of feeling when you hear of people who voted Leave signing the petition because it's not what because they've now seen what's taken place over the last couple of years, that they think that there's now that it should go back to the people to decide. And it's one of the options. Now, I think the Conservatives, many Conservatives will try and stop this process or try and stop another referendum. But it's certainly having it's certainly having an impact on building support. As you saw yesterday, there was 1 million people who went to London to march asking for a second referendum. And it goes back to my earlier point about not having a booklet or a vision of what Leave would look like when the UK was to leave the European Union. And I think that above all else is, to me, one of the strongest arguments of going back to the people and asking them for a second referendum. Because if it's not a second referendum, the people, and I now feel we've got to the stage where only the people can break the deadlock, and they can only do that in one of two ways. One is a general election, and the other one's a second referendum. We now know the Tories, the independent group, the Lib Dems are not going to support a no confidence motion in the government. So it seems to me that in the absence of a general election, there has to be a second referendum to determine this issue.
Ellen, the petitioner, she stated that in 3 years the government has become infamous for changing its mind, so why can't the people? Do you think that this petition will have any impact?
If we look at the history of this petitions page, we've seen quite a lot of criticism of it. A lot of Brexiteers saying that you can sign up with any name and you just it's quite ironic to see that the people that insist that the UK government and its systems are highly democratic are then using the same systems to prove that they are in order to prove their point. If we look at the history of this tool, this way of submitting petitions, the last two highest placed petition with the most signatures were, I think one was to ban Trump from coming over here. Obviously that didn't happen, and the one that has just been overtaken is the one that asked for the UK to have the Brexit referendum, but only with a minimum of 70% participation. So having 70% participation, I think it was around 70, and having a threshold of 75% of people taking part.
Okay, can I just have a wee 2-minute interruption there? We're just trying to sort a mic problem here. Obviously, Chris, you know, another problem in the mix is the DUP that's holding the government to hostage. Although they don't seem to be thinking that they would be supporting the government either. Is that going to make or break it?
Well, I think that Tory MPs are using the DUP as cover. Those Tory MPs who are voting against the deal are using the DUP as cover to vote against the deal. My understanding is the government has been working on the DUP for several weeks. I think if the DUP were to support the agreement, that would make it more difficult for those hardline Brexiteers and the Tory benches to vote against the deal. We'll have to wait and see. But I think what troubles me about the whole process and the government's relationship with the DUP is they seem to think they can buy them off, but buy them off specially, and there's no funding consequentials for other parts of the UK. Scotland would be getting money if we got the Barnett consequential from what Northern Ireland would be getting thanks to the DUP negotiations. Then there'd be more money for Scotland in public services. I think that it does disturb me that the Conservatives are dealing with the DUP in this way, particularly those Tory cabinet ministers who don't realise that people in Northern Ireland for years have been voting along religious grounds. I mean, if they didn't know that, then you have to wonder why they're in these cabinet positions looking after Northern Ireland in the very first place.
And do you think, in terms of just picking up what you said there about the money, it just seems completely ironic that services are getting cut, money's getting cut, money's cut to the Scottish Government, but yet we can find this magic money when it suits them to prop up their government.
It's a magic money tree, absolutely. And you have to ask yourself where it's going, but it just seems to confirm to all of us that austerity has been a political choice. It's not been an economic choice, it's been a political choice as far as the Tories are concerned, to cut back the public services, to cut back the role of the public sector, to deregulate the labour market, to deregulate tax collection, where we have a situation where there's now, at the very least, £70 billion in unpaid taxes, many of them multinational companies, and yet the state employs 4,745 full-time equivalents to chase social security fraud, which is estimated at 1.2 billion, as opposed to the 70 billion that multinationals are getting away with not paying to the taxes of this country.
And you picked up earlier on the march in London, and we've heard that there's at least 1 million people attended London, and interestingly Nicola Sturgeon spoke on stage and called for the Prime Minister to stand down right now. She said that the speech on Wednesday was disgraceful, and you talked about that earlier too. She said it pitches Parliament against people. But the most significant thing, Ellen, about that march was the absence of Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's been absent in almost everything that we've encountered in the last 3 years and has not really made his presence shown. So it was not surprising. He was a Brexiteer and continues to hold that position and holds back his entire party with that, not posing an opposition. I think what is interesting about the whole Theresa May potentially not continuing to be Prime Minister is who wants that job. Yes, on the day after Brexit, it might be an interesting thing to be Prime Minister, but who wants to be Prime Minister on the day of Brexit? I don't think it's a feasible option. Even for her to resign, she is just part of the deadlock that is currently going on in Westminster politics.
Would you say, Chris, that actually this is a national crisis?
Yes, I would say it's a national crisis. I would also say it's a political crisis. I mean, I think what you see both the Conservative side and the Labour side is there's no real agreement on how they go forward, principally because both on the Conservative side, but more so on the Labour side, they represent constituencies who voted both ways. I mean, you've got Labour MPs who are in heavily vote leave constituencies, you've got some of them who were in vote remain constituencies, and they haven't really come to, from what I can see, a consensus, which is why you see both Tories and Labour MPs groups voting 3 different ways. You've seen some abstain in votes, you've seen some go against their whip, and you see some fall under whip, and you end up with this complete mess. Excuse me. So that's why some of the votes have been tight. The Cooper Amendment a couple of weeks ago was 2 votes in it. That's why you see that. But I think there is a political crisis, and there is no real sense I get from either the Conservatives or the Labour Party as to what the consensus would be, and that's why the indicative vote process I think next week could become messy, because it's like the Scottish Cup draw, where we're playing knockout with various votes. So I just feel that there is a crisis, and I think that Ellen's point about who wants to be Prime Minister on Brexit Day will wake up that day not only thinking it's Brexit Day, but then having to discover there's at least another 2 years of negotiations about the way forward and what the political and trading relationships are going to be between the UK, the EU and elsewhere in the world.
Which is a worry in itself, given that the negotiations for the last nearly 3 years have been such a mess.
Well, I think that what worries me is not just it's a mess, is what we're seeing now. You've got Theresa May blaming Parliament. She's the one who's flooding the parliamentary agenda with hundreds of statutory instruments that we have to go through. I'm going to 2 statutory instrument committees a week. And what concerns me the most is that what you're already seeing during that process is the weakening of rights. The weakening of workers' rights has started. There was a there was a food and nutrition statutory instrument I went to where they had said that the EU regulations will no longer be in law, they'll just be guidance. So you're downgrading that, you're downgrading those rights. And we saw this week, quite incredibly, a social security contributions one, where the UK government admitted if it's unclear whether this person's a UK citizen or an EU citizen, that they won't pay anyway, they won't pay the social security anyway. And I think we're seeing a real trend here which concerns me, where if it's a Gove or a Liam Fox, they'd be quite happy to do a trade deal with Trump that would open up the National Health Service and open up other public services to further outsourcing, where food standards would be a lot lower and you would have you know, the chlorinated chicken and all of that. And I'm really concerned at the direction of travel going forward, particularly from the Tory party, in terms of what then happens after Brexit and the sort of trade deals that they would sign up to.
In terms, Ellen, of, you know, one of the reasons why we're where we are is because this rhetoric of the EU being bad, you know, straight bananas and all that stuff. But what people don't talk about is the protections that the EU afford us, and picking up in some of the points that Chris has made there. You know, if we lose those protections, then some people are going to be in really difficult water.
It's really particularly interesting to Scotland because Holyrood was established based on the fact that the EU was pushing for greater democratic franchise across the regions of each of the member countries, and that poses quite a significant threat to Holyrood, one that I think we all in Scotland are not taking seriously enough. We are seeing, I mean, as an EU national and an activist, I've spent the last 3 years campaigning and making sure that my voice is heard, and one of the messages that I had to bring across was about the whole first they came for the socialists. The reality is that the rights of people that the majority of the population didn't care that much about have been eroded like nobody's business, and they are now not able to protect you. My voting rights, even in Scotland, even in local elections, have already been removed. I can't protect either of you. You're losing your rights as European citizens very, very shortly. We cannot protect you. It's been a steady erosion of rights, and it's something that is fairly obvious to see from the outside. I think this is where migrants have a specific advantage, but it is also fairly obvious from the inside by now, and I think if it isn't obvious by now, you'll be unfortunately very negatively surprised by how significantly it will impact each and every one of us who remain in this country.
But the other end of the scale of that, Corri, is interesting, is that, and I see this in my case, what the number of people are asking me to sign Irish passport applications or other passport applications, and you're starting to see people who, you know, have an Italian family or an Irish family or anywhere else in the EU are now obtaining passports for those countries. And they're doing that for a reason. They're doing that because they know that when they travel, it's going to be easier having an EU passport going into Europe than it is having a British one.
And also not just travel. I mean, people are leaving the country. There's people that have EU citizen families where even just one member is an EU citizen, but the entire family with British passports has to find a way to get out of the country because the EU citizen in this country is not protected and isn't able to stay protected. We've got several instances of that where it's up to 10, 12 family members that are leaving, British family members that are leaving for the continent for one EU national who can't get their residency here. The brain drain is going to be incredible.
And I think it's been mentioned plenty of times, it's like, you know, if you're not concerned, it's because you're not paying attention to, you know, what's going on. You mentioned earlier about the hostile environment, Chris, and obviously we had Theresa May, you know, as you said, blaming the MPs for this Brexit mess, which is quite ironic, really. But in the top of that, we had Anna Sowerby this week saying that she couldn't go home because she'd had death threats because of Brexit. And obviously you mentioned Joe Cox, and I know, you know, MPs have to go through a raft of safety measures, you know, from getting your house and your accommodation in London and stuff. I mean, it's a sad day for democracy, regardless of what party you're in. Elected members, we also saw Ian Blackford getting shouted at. He was getting called a traitor this week as well.
He was called a traitor to England, which, you know,
traitor to England.
I mean, I don't know whether that's fair or not.
You can live with that, I reckon.
But well, I think Ian will live with that. But no, but it is serious. I mean, is one part of the job that I never thought I would have to deal with is threats. Now, I've had some, and the police have dealt with those and had to caution people and all of that. But no one should be getting death threats. No one should, no elected representative should be getting advised that they can't travel home, which is the case with Anna Soubry. And that's why I think the Prime Minister's statement on Wednesday was dangerous for that reason, because that was an encouragement to some people to blame members of Parliament for Brexit not happening. Without any self-consciousness of whether, she had any responsibility for the current political crisis. And we've been advised by the Deputy Speaker Lindsay Hoyle, who you'll know, Corri, deals with a lot of the security issues. We're now getting advice about how to travel from not just our London accommodation to Parliament, but also back in the constituencies, that we now have to take taxis to go back and forward to places. And I think that is a concern to all of us who are elected representatives, but it should worry the public as well. The public want, to see politicians who are accessible, who go around the communities, and when we get that sort of advice, we then have to manage that process. And I think that we really do need to. I think the Prime Minister should apologise to the House of Commons on Monday, and it needs to be a heartfelt apology. Because her statement in Wednesday was very dangerous.
Ellen, do you think that this kind of situation highlights the importance of language used by politicians?
Yes, and I also think it's an issue that doesn't just affect politicians, not that that isn't important. Nobody should feel unsafe in executing their job. But it's also activists and campaigners that are getting death threats left, right and centre, and yes, very much so, the language absolutely matters. I remember when Theresa May called us citizens of nowhere instead of citizens of the world. It made all the difference, especially May with her history as the Home Secretary. You can see an incredible history of placing blame upon other people's heads. She was the one who targeted migrants, then she became the PM suddenly. It was the judicial system down in England that were traitors. From that it moved on to the Parliament. There's a whole line of argument, and obviously that isn't supported by the populists that are also members in the Westminster Parliament, that are saying extremely unhelpful things in extremely crass language. Yeah, it doesn't help, and it is still being used.
Yeah. And I suppose, from the point of view, if this kind of behaviour continues, then it just puts people off, going forward for elected positions. And it's not even just the elected member, it's the people, your family and your support networks as well, who are incredibly worried about you. Yep. Especially when you're an MP or an MSP and you're away from home, your family's still living in that home. Nobody knows whether you're there or not, and it potentially could be targets. I mean, it's a scary time.
Well, it's only 2 years ago this week was the terrorist attack at Westminster, where we were all locked, where we were in lockdown and we were all in the chamber and couldn't get out. So, there really should have been from Theresa May some cognizance of that we're approaching a special anniversary like that. And that does worry people. I mean, so when the House of Commons isn't locked down, the first thing you do is contact your family members and let them know you're okay and safe. And you're right, it does affect family, it affects friends, and it affects a lot of people.
I think there's another threat about violence that is stoked by the whole Brexit process. I mean, we've seen interesting developments coming out of Northern Ireland again, and there's a definite potential for political violence to escalate again. We can't just be watching out for, the insults and the unhelpful language, but there is a real danger of violence no matter which way we're looking. Brexit means that the instability, the insecurity that you're causing to people, the erosion of rights of people leads to violence. This is why it's the counter move that the EU has made. while the EU isn't perfect, this is what the EU has been concerned with, to make rules that make it possible to live together respectfully, peacefully, and in a way that is good for the economies of each of the member states. By moving that connection to the EU, it allows us to descend right back into violence and poverty.
And obviously Mr Tusk, he said on Friday that the fate of Brexit is in the hands of our British friends. As the EU, we are prepared for the worst but hope for the best. Again, there's been lots of bad press around the EU has been the problem. So Theresa's kind of moved from it's all the EU's fault to now it's the MP's fault. She just isn't like moving the blame about. But actually, you know, the EU has tried to, they've got 27 states they have to take into account. So if 27 states can come together and form a unified position, you just can't expect it to be, you know, to sort out for the UK, to decide what the UK want. But it's reported this week, and this picks up on something you said earlier, Chris, as well, that the finance industry is taking roughly £1 trillion in assets out of the UK as a result of the Brexit uncertainty. Now that's up $200 billion from the estimate in January. Obviously firms are triggering their contingency plans for a no deal, but the kind of main contenders for where this work is going is Frankfurt, Paris and obviously Dublin, which is kind of ironic given that if Scotland had voted yes in 2014, Scotland might have been that contender for that work to have come here.
Well, that's right. But, you know, it's not just the finance industry. I mean, there'll be other industries that will now be considering their options, and it's about, and it'll come down to what the actual deal in terms of trading relationships will be. But it's a lot of money, £1 trillion. There's a lot of money that could be spent on other things. And I think what we're seeing is just, you know, the whole uncertainty of what these future relationships will be is causing all these companies to make contingency plans and think about where they're going to be. And the irony, of course, I remember during the referendum that the economies of Iceland, Ireland, and all these other small independent European nations that are around about Scotland were having their economies bashed by these Better Together campaigners. Now we see the truth emerge is that they're going to see the benefits of their relationships with the European Union at a time when, you know, the UK turns inwards and turns in on itself. And there is, you know, perhaps an irony about that, but I think that what is happening in Scotland, and certainly from the canvassing we're doing, is people who did vote no the last time are now thinking about their options. And I think it's up to us to talk to them and persuade them that an independent Scotland and the European Union is what's best for our country.
Yeah. We're moving to the other side of the world now, and obviously we had the terrible tragedy in New Zealand, and this week the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced that there's going to be a national ban on all military-style semi-automatic weapons and any high-capacity ammunition, magazine-type weapons or anything that can be modified. And there seems to be cross-party support. There's been widespread global admiration for the way the New Zealand PM has handled this situation. Would you agree, guys?
I think not just the PM, also, I mean, if you've seen the haka being carried out by the students, the haka in itself is an extremely emotional occasion, but the way that went down, I dare anybody not to get really emotionally moved by it. It has been coped with dignity and respect and concern for the well-being of all involved. And that's admirable.
I think the New Zealand Prime Minister has shown real leadership, as have the rest of the New Zealand community, in saying that it will not give succour to far-right extremism. And there's a lesson for the UK as well, because I mean, I would argue strongly that far-right extremism is one of the greatest threats to security here in the UK. So I think that's a lesson for all of us. But I think that how not just the New Zealand Prime Minister, but how the New Zealand people have handled this tragedy, I think has been an inspiration. and I think it shows that that they're very clear, and I think the lesson for all of us is very clear, is that we should not give any succor to hatred, and we should take it on and let them know that we will not allow people to be divided based on their race, their religion, or where they come from.
Yeah, and obviously in stark contrast we've got America, who's had umpteen horrible gun situations, and they just will not take on board. Their gun lobby seems to be the ones that put so much pressure on whoever to stop you know, any laws coming in to change that. And it seems ironic that, you know, and obviously we had our own shooting unfortunately in Dunblane many years ago, but you need to be able to take that situation and act on it to ensure that that doesn't happen again as much as you can. You're never going to account for everything, but in terms of putting stuff forward to make sure that, you know, that this is not going to repeat itself again. But talking about America, and obviously we've got Mr. Trump this week, so we saw the special counsel Robert Mueller. He's submitted his long-awaited report on the alleged collusion between Russia and Donald during his presidential campaign in 2016. Now, the Attorney General, William Barr, he'll now summarise that report and decide how much will be shared with Congress and the public. Mr. Trump himself says it's been nothing but a witch hunt. What do you think the likely outcome of this is going to be, Chris?
I think the Democratic Congress will want to now do their own inquiries, and I think that will probably be the next stage, particularly with the presidential race heating up and soon getting into primaries for the Democratic nomination. I think the Congress will want to now do its own report, and they probably should. Now, they have to be careful that that's not seen as and given succor to the witch hunt claims that Trump will use, but I think that they will now certainly want to take control of any inquiry and continue to deal with it in that manner. It does now open up the opportunities of who's going to be the Democratic candidate. It would be ironic if the candidate called Castro was to be the candidate and beat Trump, but I suspect that it'll be a woman who will be the Democratic candidate. But I think all of us who will look at America at the moment will want to see a Democratic candidate being successful in the next presidential election, because I think that Trump has been rather dangerous in some of his views around race, around gender equality, not that he believes in that, and about many other issues. And I think that we need to deal with this alternative right politics in the hope that America leads the way on that in the next presidential election.
I think, Ellen, I believe that he refused to be interviewed during this process, although he did answer written questions. Do you think he thinks he's above the law?
Yes, I do believe that. I believe that he's his own action figure, its own superhero, and he will keep running with this as long as he possibly can. Obviously, the problem with democracy is that it takes a while for democracy to catch up, and I think in that context, if we look at the constitutional thing about weapons, this is something where Scotland really has to pay attention. If we are to become an independent nation, we have to pay a hell of a lot of very focused attention to what is part of the Constitution and what isn't. This is what this gun debate centres around at the time when the Constitution was written. Gun laws could be written the way that they were because guns were not capable of wreaking the havoc. It was about protecting one's own property. But there was no more than one shot possible to be fired. We're at a completely different technological stage, and because of this, it's a classic example of how important it is to write policies with the future in mind, to future-proof them, to make them neutral to what comes in terms of government, but to give people rights. So, yeah.
And picking up on the hostile environment stuff we spoke about earlier, this week he's made some controversial comments. He described Barack Obama as the founder of the so-called Islamic State. He also described Hillary Clinton as the co-founder, although he said he was being sarcastic after that. But more dangerously, he was urging his supporters to take up arms against Hillary to stop her appointing a Liberal judge or Liberal judges to the US Supreme Court in the November elections. I mean, this is similar to Theresa May. This kind of language is just not acceptable.
That in itself should be something that should be prosecutable under American law, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't, but it's probably the least of the problems that Trump has brought upon himself and the nation. It's that kind of language that is deeply dangerous, that is hate speech and directly inciting people to violence and to breaking the law and to potentially murder people. It's absolutely unacceptable, completely.
Well, he thinks he can say and do what he likes. I mean, what I say to people is, look, of course everybody's, the right to freedom of speech, but with that comes responsibility. And with that comes the responsibility not to hurt other people, to be as belligerent as he is. I sometimes wonder if he thinks he's still running his game show, because frankly, it's very hard to take him seriously, but what makes me take him seriously is just how dangerous he can be, just with some of the, with those comments and some of his actions, is that we have a very dangerous president, and the fact that he has control over nuclear weapons, and to trust a man like him to have his finger on the button, that scares me. And the quicker he is removed by the American people as president, the better.
And obviously you touched on earlier on about the potential of Brexit to open up trading negotiations with America. Do you think the public really understand, it's kind of what we spoke about earlier, but not paying attention, do you think they really understand the consequences of the Americans being involved around NHS or our food?
I think people are starting to, and I think the people who had concerns, rightly in my view, about TTIP and a trade deal with America and the EU have very real concerns now that it's not a democratic president who's negotiating this with the European Union. It's now a hard-right Tory government negotiating with a hard-right American president. So I think that people are starting to pick that up, and I think people are starting to take cognizance of that. The 5 million people who have signed a petition this week, do have concerns about what's going on, and they do have concerns about the direction of travel. They are not just people who are blindly pressing a button. They are people with very real concerns, and that should be respected. And
obviously, I think in terms of the general public, they have been saturated with Brexit for nearly 3 years now. And then you got all this stuff in the mix of Trump and the Russians, and then Trump with Theresa, and almost like it just makes it really difficult for people to just get a grasp of what's going on and what is the potential out there.
I think it's one of the things that we haven't talked enough about. A couple of years ago, a Canadian author, Naomi Klein, wrote this book, The Shock Doctrine. And what we're experiencing at the minute in all sorts of places across the world is that there's a deliberate shock doctrine of shocking and spreading chaos. This seems to be the overall PR strategy of the Russian interference in all sorts of democratic elections, but it's the same here. Bombarding the country with one thing after the other. You can't fight all the fires at the same time. It leads to fatigue, it leads to complete resignation in people, and I think we're seeing that in the independence movement, especially right now as well. People that have been active and outspoken are completely losing their faith in what is going on, and aren't able to pay attention to the sheer volume of negative information that we have to process. It is one of the ways in which we can really disrupt progress by confusing people to the point where there's no concrete action to be taken. And we've managed in the UK to get so far that the people that are signing this petition, where we're almost, it is now the #1 petition on the government website that has ever been done. All the people that signed it will be aware that this will lead to a debate at most, but it might not be a debate that even happens before we leave the EU. They are completely disenfranchised.
But it's part of a strategy to sicken people, I think. And you do pick it up where people just say, just go on with it. People are pretty sickened now.
And Theresa May uses that line all the time.
She started using that. She started using that this week. As much as I felt it was dangerous, someone's advising her to do it because they're picking up that people are sick of it. but they do expect, I mean, I think the majority of people do expect that they want politicians to scrutinise things and not to sign up to anything. I mean, you know, the fact that people who supported Brexit will not support this withdrawal agreement tells you there's a problem with the withdrawal agreement. So, but it is a clear strategy, is to sicken people. And what concerns me about Brexit and what Trump is doing and others is that they are quite deliberately pointing at other people and saying that, and saying to one group of people, it's their fault that you don't have what you have and that things are going bad. Not that it's the government's fault, it's somebody else's fault. So, and that's where you have the division in terms of race and nationality. Blaming EU nationals for, you know, the fact that wages have gone down has never been proven, and in fact all research tells you that's just nonsense. So you had that during Brexit. You have, you know, blame the Muslim community for what's going on with Islamic State. Again, a complete nonsense. You know, anyone who's done any research will show you Muslims are a very peace-loving religion. So you have all these factors where they just try and make sure that no one blames them, whereas the real blame for a lot of what's going on wrong in the world is corrupt multinational companies, it's governments making cuts and hard right-wing decisions and going about austerity and you know, trying to alienate people from government. And what's happening with Brexit, getting back to that, it's about sickening people and saying, I'll just sign the thing. But I think that we need to be responsible about this. I can't and I will not vote for something that I think will cause lasting economic harm to our country.
And obviously we had Farage this week's suggestion that it's Russian collusion that's been supporting this Brexit petition. You know, again, it's just this other throwing something else into the mix to kind of make people stop and wonder. Do you think, Ellen, it's the old kind of divide and conquer?
I think it's specifically ironic because, as far as I remember, there's been quite a lot of interest in Farage himself and his contact to the Russian state. So for him to say that is quite funny, but it plays into the hands of what both of these parties are involved in. It is about spreading chaos. It is about making people incapable of listening to a comprehensive debate, a good argument with a counter argument, constructive criticism received with you know, some sort of measured argument. None of that is going on anymore. What we're having is clickbait arguments. It's not even articles anymore. It's the easy headlines, and in that way it's very easy to discriminate. And unfortunately the current head of the British state is a master and mistress at this. She's fantastic at placing blame and scapegoating other people for her own failings, specifically when it comes to Brexit, the delay strategy, and then putting her deal on the table again and again and again. It's exactly what we're talking about. Plays into their hands. Yep. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be working out for her at the minute, but that's to the detriment of the entire country, and she still holds her job.
I mean, obviously, kind of picking up on what you were saying, Chris, this kind of blame has always been, it's things like, you know, immigrants are here, they're either taking our jobs or they're taking our benefits. Well, it can't be both anyway, but you know what I mean? It's that idea, or it's people on benefits, you know, they're fraud, they're all claiming benefits fraudulently, despite the fact that fraud's actually a tiny part of it. But it's nobody looks at the corporations that are not paying corporation tax, and they just seem to get away with that. What role does the media play in all this about the information that's given out to the public?
Well, some of the media are controlled by multinational companies, that's the first thing. And I would say Scottish newspapers, and I would say all the Scottish newspapers as well. You know, there's not that many who are not controlled by some multinational company, whether it's NewsQuest, Gannett or others. And I think one of the key things for me is, and my concern about the media is, and you see this in newspapers and you see this in television, is there's been a whole series of cuts and jobs lost in the newspaper industry. Some of them at sub-editor level who would sort some of the things out that you see, you know, the clickbait, as Ellen has said, who would give you decent headlines. I mean, when I get to read newspapers online, usually the headline and the story are completely different. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, the headline is supposed to be the fact, and you read the story and it's not. And I have a real concern that on the basis of profit and maintaining profit, we're seeing jobs lost in the media industry where there's not that level of scrutiny, there's not, you know, the investigative journalism seems to be disappearing from many parts of the newspaper industry and the media industry in general, and I think that's a great pity. And I think mistakes get made in 24/7 live news channels. I mean, you had the exchange between Kay Burley and Ian Blackford was fascinating, you know, it was just, and we saw some of that during the Scottish independence referendum where, you know, media journalists on the television are questioning people, and stating opinion is fact. And it wasn't facts, it was opinions. And we saw that with the exchange with Kay Burley and Ian Blackford, as I said, where an opinion is moulded into a fact. So I've got a real concern about the direction of travel of the media industry in general. And how some individual journalists are treated when they do become investigative journalists. There's a very real concerns about that, and that's some of the work we're doing in Parliament with the National Union of Journalists.
And do you think, Ellen, in terms of, you know, the way some of the journalists behave, I mean, surely their role is there to interview people and get the information out of them for whatever they say. It's not up to journalists to start putting because they're not getting interviewed. It's not their job to be there putting their points of view across.
I think technically you're right, but their job is whatever their boss says their job is, and Chris is absolutely correct. It's not about proper investigative journalism at this point anymore. I think it does have to do with a sort of being online 24/7, that we are all able to receive news from all over the world. If we're honest, we hardly know what's going on outside of the UK. But the fact that we're having to cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, means that either you have more content but nobody invests in that much quality investigative journalism, or you have emotional opinion-based journalism, and the opinion-based thing is really what we need to be concerned about. It's a bit like in this round here, you're clearly a very legitimate character, you're an MP, and I'm sitting here, I'm just an EU national. Yes, my expertise has to do with this, but technically my opinion doesn't weigh up against yours in the same way. Actually, unless I'm speaking about EU nationals, right, it's my opinion should be much less on the balance than yours should. And I'm not saying that because I don't want people to pay attention to what I'm saying, but the reality is if we're pitching an expert against somebody who just disagrees with them regardless of their background, that is not valid journalism. That is not forming an opinion that should be considered anything really. Should be considered anything legitimate.
Well, your opinion definitely counts in this, Ellen, definitely. Do you think social media has been a bit of a godsend for us, and could you imagine where we would be now if we didn't have social media? Because I think it's been the medium that, although it has its downsides and bad points, but that has been the medium that people have been able to get factual information out there. What would it have been like if we didn't have social media? Because then you're relying on the mainstream media and the print.
I think it's one of those things we have to learn as humanity to use the tools that we are inventing ourselves, and error is part of that learning process of how do we deal with these things. We can't not use social media either just because it's easily manipulated. The only thing that you can do to fortify your house against fire is not just fire regulations overall, but making sure that you don't leave the candles burning. So you need to be aware what's going on with you, your social media use, and how that continues into your life, what information you take in, which parts you don't. I also think this is a very personal challenge. Each and every one of us has to behave in a responsible way, the way that we're shouting out into the world. It's maybe easier for people who have professional social media accounts because it's very clear that there's a professional line, but lots of laymen and private accounts don't have to hold themselves by default to this high standard, and actually it is up to all of us to not do that.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, there's this thing where you can say stuff in social media that you absolutely would not say in real life.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think that, I can't remember who made this analogy, but when I heard it I thought it was absolutely right, is that a lot of people treat Twitter, for example, as the equivalent of shouting, of being in your car and shouting at the windscreen. And some people do use Twitter that way, and you know, I can see them, and I won't name particular individuals, but there's some people's Twitter accounts I see, and that's exactly how they tweet it. But it should still be an information tool. It should still be a tool to provide a message and to send messages to the public. Facebook's better than that. My difficulty with Twitter is trying to keep down to 140 characters, Corri, you know. But you know, so it has its place. And I think that, you know, if it's done properly, it does challenge other more traditional aspects of the media. And you see that now with, you know, I can't remember the last time that I saw people regularly buying newspapers. And that's principally because of the 24/7 environment and news cycle we're in, and the environment we're in that people prefer to go online. Part of the difficulty of that, of course, is now that some of the media think the way to get around that is to charge, and I don't really see that working, because I think if you get people are people, if they get access to a free, you know, website where they pick up news, that's where they're going to go. That's where they're going to go. So. Yeah.
Moving over to Mozambique, we saw some terrible scenes this week with the cyclone and the floods, and it reported that the death toll sitting at 732, and there's thousands of people being displaced, are in need of help. We had winds reported of 105 miles an hour, which you just can't imagine, and obviously there was 259 killed in Zimbabwe and 56 in Malawi as it stands. You just can't imagine how terrifying something like that must be. But it's like, where do we go in terms of, we will be putting up the disaster appeal, they'll be putting a link to it later on, but you know, it's at times like this when globally we do need to come together and help each other.
Absolutely. This is a natural disaster, and you know, the people in these three countries are facing things that I don't think we can even contemplate and even think about. Certainly it's good that governments are now using the international development funds to do that, and I think our thoughts and prayers should go out to the people who are caught up with this.
No, it just seems it would be devastating for all involved, Ellen.
It would be. I think we also need to pull together as a global community in order to prevent what is causing these kinds of disasters, which is very clearly global warming, and we will see a hell of a lot more of this exact type of disaster going into the next couple of decades if we don't get it together in the next 11 and a half years. We are all screwed. I'm sorry to be that blunt, but that is where we're at. We are going to see our own types of disasters all over. I also think on the point of foreign aid, this is a very good point for the SNP to take forward into the spring conference, considering that the solidarity payment is agreeing to basically hand our money from Scotland over to the UK to contribute to their foreign aid and spend it as they see fit. I think we can do better. But that's my personal wish.
Well, that'll be for debate in April, and I know that I'm certainly submitting amendments along with colleagues into that particular motion. So.
Very pleased to hear that.
Good. This week as well, we saw US-backed forces proclaiming that the capture of the Islamic State's last territory in Syria, although they've acknowledged that there is still sleeper cells around the world and there still remains a threat. Do you think that will have a positive impact?
Well, that will depend on where we go forward. It's quite clear that the most successful group who have rolled back Daesh is the Kurdish and the Kurds. But yet what we find is that the so-called coalition forces are allowing people like Erdogan and others to do what they like to the Kurdish people, which I just don't understand. I think that given that the Kurdish community have been successful in rolling back Daesh with boots on the ground, I think that there should be a real discussion now about what we can do for the Kurdish people and giving them their own land to govern themselves. And I was pleased to say I was at a Nowruz event last night in Glasgow, Kurdish New Year. A great night. Kurdish community are playing a fantastic role in Glasgow and Edinburgh and other places into our community. And I think that they are rightly asking politicians, what are you doing to help the Kurdish people who are in Turkey, Syria and Iraq, and I think we need now to have a real discussion about that. Unfortunately, people like Trump and Theresa May and others are allowing Erdogan to do what he likes.
Yeah. Do you think this will make a difference globally, Ellen?
In the perception, potentially, but the reality is, and Chris is completely right, it's about how we take responsibility for the mess that we have left as a global community. And yes, that will have implications for the future. I read a saying about how the only thing that we learn from history is that history teaches us nothing. We need to catch up, and this kind of thing, the Kurds are in many ways a very endangered people, and for them to have taken the lead and having been the boots on the ground, it takes the stabilization of the society that is on the ground in order to provide for peace. Soldiers don't make peace. Yeah. They're not there for that.
You picked up earlier on, Ellen, I think, about all the negativity, and we're in danger of this programme being completely negative. It's just there's never seems to be much good news. But on a plus point, for the second year running, Finland has topped the UN list of the happiest countries, with Denmark, Norway, Iceland, Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, New Zealand, Canada and Australia making up the top 10. Now the UK comes in at 15, which actually was a bit of a surprise, and the US is 19. Where do you think an independent Scotland might rank in something like that?
Depends. It very much depends on what kind of independent Scotland we're going to enter in and if we're going to get one. But if we do vote for independence or obtain independence, it's very much about the policies that we make in the country that we want to be, that will shape whether we will be the happiest or not. I think geographical placement, we are very well placed amongst the Nordic nations to be one of the happiest nations on the planet.
Well, that's the vision and that's the goal and that's the hope, and what I'm guessing is if the UK is in 15th place, it's because the Celtic nations are keeping them up there. And if the Celtic nations weren't there, that the UK would be in the relegation zone.
Yep.
Okay. And obviously we had Wednesday was International Day of Happiness, so I'm going to put you both in the spot. What makes you happy?
Well, that's a very good question. What makes me happy?
Making a difference in the community makes me happy. It really does. That's the only thing that I can think of at the minute. It sounds incredibly cheesy, but it is so fulfilling to care for something, to do it together with other people, and to make a difference that lasts in the community. So, cheesy but true.
Good.
Well, it's not cheesy. It's actually the case. I think that when you find out that someone who has been in real difficulties, that you've been able to assist them out of those difficulties, is what makes this particular job satisfying and makes it happy. Happiness in general is actually sometimes just having some time to yourself, with your family, your loved ones, and just being able to relax, because in this job that's not always an easy thing to do.
Great, that's great, guys. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, so I'd like to thank Chris and Ellen. It's been a really good show. Thank you for coming along and giving us your input. We hopefully will be back during the week with Scotland at 7, and we'll see you again next Sunday for the Full Scottish.